3 start target group raw 22025.
31 Magnum 3-seater peak 20259, time out
3 strobes. Bearing
So all players SA6.
52 Singer 5 West defending 210.
978 Harley 31 is aspect -1 with
131, anchor 61 raw, 01558, 25,000.
Anchor 61 for the roll.
351, expect the left hand tanker shortly. Traffic raw, 04515 at 17,000, take those 64.
Driver 4, possible hit raw 27019 low. Driver 4 is here, number 1 full reset at middle cover. Number 1, telling C-130, no, 4 meters only, good IRS, engage. Number 1, kill C-130.
What is up, everyone? How's it going? Happy holidays. As you can see, it's snowing. I don't live in a place where it snows, so gotta provide myself some snow somehow. Yeah, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, whatever you prefer. Don't really care. Just gonna jump right into the video. So in this video, we're gonna be covering taxi and takeoff. I'm not gonna be covering landing. Landing will be a separate video due to the fact that there's quite a bit to go over, many different things, and I don't want to make another half-hour long video. So with that being said, there's a few things that we're going to do before we taxi. We're going to go over our takeoff speed and our rotation speed, and go over switches and everything. Alright, so as you can see, I have a knee board up here with a lot of information. We're only going to focus on a couple things. We're going to focus on this equation right here to get our actual takeoff speed, and then figure out what our actual rotation speed is, because there's a couple things you need to note in order to figure out that final number. But I'm going to keep it very basic, because I mean, this is just DCS, it's just a simulation, it's not real life. Real life, there'd be a lot more to go into it. So with that, we're going to go overhead. We're going to go over here to this chart, and you can see this chart has a lot of numbers, a lot of lines, and first glance it could get confusing, but I'm going to break it down for you real quick. Each of these lines are broke down to 0.5, so this would be 16, 16,500, 17, 17.5, so on and so forth. So we're going to go to the rearm refuel window. I have it hotkeyed to R in order to bring it up quicker, and you don't have to go through a bunch of radio menus. We're going to figure out what our weight is. So right here you can see 38,000 or 30,800. So we're going to round up to 31. With that number, we're going to go to our chart. We can see this is 32, so that would be 31.5, 31. From there, we're going to go vertical up to this intersecting line, and then we're going to go left. So go left, we're going to follow that line, and it's going to be 164, it looks like. So we're going to do that again, so 32, 31.5, 31. Go up, intersects, and move left. Boom, 164. Alright, so we know for a fact that it's 164. We're going to go over to this equation, and we're going to plug in the numbers. I'll give you time, if you're doing this right now, while you're in the cockpit, go ahead and figure out that number. So for me, it's going to be 164. Okay. With that, I'm going to go back to that chart, and I'm going to look at here where it says rotate at 10 knots less than computed takeoff speed for non-afterburner. Non-afterburner, when they say that, it pretty much means just at mill power. Okay. Rotate at 15 knots less than computed takeoff speed for afterburner. So we're going to do afterburner takeoff, so we're going to take 15 knots off of our computed speed that we got. So mine would be now 147. So that information, that's good to know. We know when we need to start rotating, so pretty much just pulling back on the stick and start lifting off the ground. So before we taxi, we're going to do a couple checks. We're going to make sure that our canopy is closed and locked, which it is, and our light is off. We're going to, we don't have this radio, so we're not going to worry about that, but if you do have radios, make sure they're set. So for us, we're going to do 2620, enter, and that's going to be the tower frequency for copy Letty. And then we're going to make sure our exterior or our altimeter and altitude indications are set and checked. For copy Letty, I know it is 2986. So if you're coming back to that airfield or you take off and you need to do an emergency landing, you always want to make sure this is set before you take off, just in case, especially if like your radar altimeter stops working, you have a rough estimate of what the actual ground is. So, and you usually do set it for about 10 feet, so that's about how high you're staying off the ground. But before we take off, we will radio into copy Letty, let them know we're taking off, request permission. They're going to give us that number and we'll be good. But we're going to make sure our exterior lights are good, so all our lights on for the weather, make sure people can see us. They're flashing, so we're about to be moving. If we weren't going to be moving anytime soon, we would keep them on steady. So we're going to keep on flashing. Make sure our EGI knobs and nav, we're in nav. And if the chocks aren't already removed, go ahead and call the ground crew and remove the chocks. So a couple things to note before actually taxiing. Depending on the weather and how long it takes you to take off, you want to set your PDOT tube turned. You want your PDOT tube turned on roughly about 2 to 5 minutes before takeoff. So we're in freezing weather, so I'm gonna turn it on now because by the time we get down there, it'll be warmed up, be good to go, and we'll be ready to take off. Another thing, you don't want to have your taxi light on because you'll blind the crew chief and ground crew, and you don't want to do that. So we'll turn it on when we start taxiing along the taxiway there, and we're well out of view of the ground crew. So we're gonna go ahead and request taxi to the runway.
Copy Letty, in field 1-1. Request taxi to runway. Enfield 1-1. Copy Letty, clear to taxi to runway 25.
Alright, so 25, so we're gonna go ahead and put that here. Alright, so runway 25. So we're going to taxi down that way because according to this, 25 runs from right to left. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and turn our nose wheel steering on. And look at our checklist. It says brakes and nose wheel steering. You're going to check your heading and your flight instruments as you taxi. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start moving. Give it a little bit of thrust. We're also going to turn our DED to our INS page, so list 6. So list and 6 will take you to this page where you will get your ground speed. Real quick before we start moving again, you want to make sure that this is the Korean Air Force Base basic employment manual for the F-16, and this portion right here is general for just about all bases that the F-16 goes to. So the important part is normal taxiing. The F-16 has you sitting on the yellow line, so make sure you're on the yellow line or whatever line is in the middle of the taxiway. You can be on either side of the line if there's a lot of traffic. That is perfectly acceptable, especially on most of the servers. That's perfectly fine. They even do it in real life. They'll taxi on the same taxiway, just be on the opposite side of each other. Alright. And then your taxi speed in clear areas should not exceed 25 knots. In case of like war or anything, you can push that to 30 if you really want it to. And then to reduce wear of the tire, slow to 10 knots when making sharp turns. So we all know that the 16, and if you don't know, the 16 is a very light fighter. Very easy to tip over at anything above 10 knots. If you're making complete 90-degree turns or anything more than a 45-degree turn, you're most likely going to tip over. And then don't ride the brakes. So definitely don't do that. You can cause hot brakes. I don't know if DCS in the future is gonna heavily implement that. So best to practice it while you can. So in case they start implementing that, you don't get hot brakes all the time. And then there is a correct braking technique that allows you to keep your speed approximately 25 knots. So what you're going to do is you're going to apply the brakes when you get to 25 knots and slow to 15 knots, and then release the brakes, allow the speed to increase again back to 25 knots, and repeat that process. So, and it tells you here ground speed is available on the INS page, list 6, and then make sure you keep alert around your surroundings. You don't want to run into other people, run into other aircraft. That's bad. You don't want to do that. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and taxi. I'm going to push the throttle forward, get some speed going. Nice apply the brakes, make sure my nose wheel steering works. As you turn, you'll notice your speed go down. So I like to keep my speed at around, or my fuel flow at around anywhere between 17 to 18, and then moderately hit the brakes as we just went over. And again, make sure you stay on the center line as best as you can. Depending on the runway, you can end up, you know, drifting like I am right now if you're not constantly watching where you're going, which if your head's down all the time and you're not watching, you're gonna run into somebody. Another thing with braking that I see a lot in DCS is people like to slam the brakes down, and that causes your brakes to lock, and when that happens, then braking is pretty much pointless. You're not going to stop, you're just going to slide forward. Essentially like driving a car. If you slam on your brakes hard enough, you're going to lock them up, you're just going to keep sliding. You're not actually going to stop or have any stopping power whatsoever. If you're taxiing on a slippery surface, i.e. like it's wet, snow, ice, whatever the case may be, you can use differential braking in order to maintain on the center line, because your nose wheel steering will essentially be pointless, especially on ice and snow. So we're going to take our time. I mean, this is a single player mission, so I'm just going to come back on the throttle as I'm coming up on this turn here, which is a complete 90, and start slowing down, moderate pressure of the brakes. I'm going to bring it up to about 1300 fuel flow to make this turn. So we're gonna get to the runway here, and we're gonna hold short. You should always hold short of the runway. You don't want to keep taxiing and you know, cause a runway incursion if someone's coming in or someone else is taxiing out. You don't want to keep taxiing. You'll make bad things happen, and then if you're online, people are gonna be mad at you. So you don't want to do that. Okay. Even if you're taxiing across the runway, still check, stop, check. Make sure there's no aircraft coming, then taxi. So before we taxi out onto the runway, we're going to do a couple checks. Now on like maps like the Vegas map at Nevada, you have airfields like Nellis, and almost any US base has what's called EORs, where you'll get pins pulled for the munitions. The weapons troops will do whatever they gotta do to your munitions, set them up, check your aircraft, and you're along your way. During your EOR, you're going to do a bunch of checks. You're going to make sure that the alternate flap is in normal. This is not modeled, so don't worry about that. Make sure your pitch and yaw trims are neutral, so centered. Make sure your engine switch is in the prise switch and the guard's down. Make sure your speed brakes are closed. Visually check, make sure both sides that they're closed. You're going to make sure again that your canopy is closed, or close it if you already haven't done it. So a lot of times, whenever DCS models like humidity and fog and all that stuff, and your canopy starts getting fogged, sometimes you'll have your canopy up all the way until you taxi to the runway, and then you'll put it down for those situations. You'll make sure your IFF is set. You could go ahead and check it if you really wanted to by hitting list and then enter, which will take you to your link 16 page. But there's no need to mess with that. External tanks, verify they're feeding. We do have a center line, so we'll double check. Yep, looks like it's feeding to me. Keep it in normal. Fuel quantity select knob in normal. Yep. Stores config switch as required. We have a very, very light load, so we're gonna just use 1. Because it is snowing, I'm gonna go ahead and change the brakes channel to 2. Alright, ground jettison switch. We're gonna keep that disabled. No need to have that on right now. Harness, don't need to worry about that. EPU, we already did that in the first video. Flare is required, not modeled yet. Don't know if it's going to be modeled in this aircraft. TFR, don't need to worry about. Probe heat, again, we already did that. Ejection safety lever, this would be the time to put it down if you haven't done it. So, make sure your master caution goes out. Flight controls, just going to cycle them real quick, make sure they all work. Final check before, you get out to the runway, and yeah, you don't want to get out to the runway and they don't work all of a sudden. Because a lot of things can happen between taxiing to takeoff. Okay. Oil pressure, you're going to make sure that PSI is good. Check your allow data. So, I'm just going to verify that it's correct. Make it what you want. And then just going to check the warnings again. No need to run through it all. Just make sure all the lights work. Don't need to worry about that, and if you have your CGP, make sure you stow it. Alright, so before we go out, we're going to turn our taxi light to landing, and then we're going to go out to the runway and take off. I'm actually going to set this on too. If you don't know what this is, go back, watch the first video, you'll understand what that is and why I'm turning it on right now. Also, if you want to turn your radar on now, you can. I'm just gonna keep it off because there's no point in me turning it on. Not engaging anybody. Don't need to lock up onto a wingman for radar assisted takeoff or anything.
Climb 300 at QFE 29.86.
Alright, so he said 29.86. We're clear to take off. So we're gonna just run through. Everything's good. We're all set to go. Alright, so we're going to run up the engines. We're going to run them up to 90% for the GE-129 engine that's in our aircraft. And when you get to 90%, make sure all your instruments work. Make sure you have proper operation. Make sure they go up. Make sure your nozzle's good. Do not go past this until you start rolling. Once you start rolling, then you can pass 90%. So, you're going to release the brakes, rolling, full afterburner. When you get to 70 knots, you're going to go ahead and turn nose wheel steering off. And 147, rotating. Wheels up before 300 knots. If you keep them up past 300 knots, you take risk of damaging your landing gear, and you don't want that. So Make sure you put them up before 300 knots. I'm gonna go ahead and go to a 12-degree climb. Turn my brightness up on my hood so you can see. And yeah, that is takeoff. Hopefully you got that far. If not, sorry, try again. Make sure this is your first time taking off in the 16. Keep the wind off. I have a little bit of wind, so if it's your first time, keep the wind off. Practice in no wind conditions. Get used to that, then work up from there. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, sub if you're not. If you don't, I don't really give a shit. If you even made it this far, awesome. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something. If not, maybe you'll learn something during landing. If not, then yeah.